Amazon Data Firehose, formerly known as Kinesis Firehose Delivery System, allows for simple transformations and delivery of data. And what's interesting here is that they renamed it and they got rid of the word delivery system, which I thought was a really good name because it really indicated as to what it did. But then for Kinesis Data Analytics, they made it the name more obvious. So it's weird that they do this, but clearly there's different teams having different opinions here, and they're just changing things all the time on us. So here's our pipeline. Looks very similar to data streams, but notice that we do not see shards in the middle. We do not think about shards. And we have producers on the left-hand side and then consumers on the right. We can use S3, Redshift, Elasticsearch, Splunk. There's a lot more than this. But the idea is that most of the time things are going to either S3 or I suppose Redshift. So those are two that are really worth your time to spend, or Splunk, I suppose. That's a very common one as well. So you choose one consumer from the predefined list. Data immediately disappears once it's consumed. You can convert incoming data to a few other file formats and compress and secure the data. You pay for data that is ingested. So this thing is super simple, but it is super awesome, and I've used it so many times for so many different use cases. So let's talk about sources. So sources basically here are the producers, okay? So they call the sources producers, and the destinations are the consumers, okay? So Data Firehose allows you to easily configure a source or sources of data, often with minimal or no programming skills. So I said earlier that they only let you choose one in the UI, but technically there could be multiple sources because multiple services could actually deliver data just like data streams to your Firehose. So technically there's multiple sources, but when you're configuring it, it looks like you can only do one. So you aren't forced to learn Java to best utilize Firehose because you're just using the SDK. So here's an example of me using the SDK, and I'm just using put record, okay? If you need something that is more proficient than put record, then you're basically putting data streams in front of it, okay? And then KPL is the one that's sending the stream, and then that one's streaming to you, if that makes sense. So for sources, we have data streams that can send to Firehose. I wrote Firehose there, but it's... I can't tell you how many times I wrote Firehose. Firehose, sorry. Data stream, so Kinesis data streams can send to Firehose. Amazon managed streaming for Kafka, so MSK can send there. But if you do choose MSK, the only destination is going to be S3. If you don't know what Kafka is, it's basically an open source alternative to Kinesis data streams. We have direct put. This is a very common way that you're going to be sending data over to Firehose. And it supports many things, but specifically the SDK and CLI, which we utilize here. But you can see here, we have the SDK listed on the top, and we have a lot of services. A lot of these services are the same things that can directly send to data streams. So that's why I didn't do the full list there, because you can kind of look at this one and get the same idea, because these basically have integrations for how data is being delivered to Firehose and also to data streams. For destinations, and destinations are producers, they just call them sources and destinations for Firehose, but they can send to specific AWS services, third-party services, or HTTP endpoints. So for AWS services, you got S3, Redshift, OpenSearch, okay? Which is interesting because earlier I wrote Elasticsearch. Yeah, I guess Elasticsearch is there, but I'm not sure why it's not listed here. So there might be some discrepancies or something has changed. It's weird. Sometimes I read the docs, sometimes I use it, and there's just different things there and you have to roll it up. But the point is we have S3, Redshift, OpenSearch, and possibly Elasticsearch, even though I don't have it listed there. For custom destinations, you can have an HTTP endpoint, so that is pretty useful. And then third-party destinations, we have a lot of stuff listed here. But I think what's pretty much universally used here is Splunk. So if you're going to learn a third-party destination, Splunk would be a really good one to utilize. Each destination has different destination configuration options. Often third-party apps need API keys from the provider, and there could be a lot to configure, so just understand that. Now we're talking about data transformation. So this is pretty much for everything. You can do this for anything. Any kind of destination you choose can have this. But the idea is that before you send your data to your destination, you can run it against a Lambda and can do any kind of transformation you want. So that's very useful. When enabled, Firehose will buffer incoming data. You can change the buffer size from 0.2 to 3 megabytes. You can change the buffer size from 0 to 900 seconds. So I believe basically when you buffer it, basically how much data it will it will receive at one given time. So that's something that's important there. There is a payload size limit of 6 megabytes for both the Lambda request and response. So just understand that there is that limit when designing these Lambdas. You can do data transformation. So you can, sorry, we're still talking about data transformation. But when you do data transformation, the JSON payload from the Lambda has to return the specific information, has to return the record ID, which Firehose will give you, and you just pass it along. You have to give it a result. So it's either OK, dropped, or processing failed. And then you actually have to pass the transferring data along, but you have to make sure that it's base64 encoded. And so AWS has a blueprint in both Python and JavaScript. It's very easy to write. You could convert it to any language you want, but you can see here, the idea is that we have the record ID coming in as the event data from Firehose. Then you have your data, and notice that they are decoding the base64 content. And then you do whatever you want to that data, and then you have to re-encode it. And then we tell the result is okay. And then we return that JSON object, okay? So pretty straightforward. For Firehose, if you need to partition your data, and when we talk about partitioning, we're not talking about shards, we're talking about partitioning it at where we're going to store it, which is going to be S3. You can enable dynamic partitioning, which will continuously partition your data to S3 based on a prefix. So that's really useful. This makes it easier to run high-performance, cost-efficient analytics on streaming data in S3 using various services such as Athena, EMR, Redshift, Spectrum, QuickSight. This makes it also easier for AWS Glue that can perform more sophisticated extract, transform, load jobs. To select the values and keys for partitioning, you have two ways. Inline partitioning, where you use JQ expressions to parse JSON. Good thing I taught you folks JQ in this course, so I told you it would come back in use. And then we have Lambda functions. So if you're not using JSON, you have a more complex data structure, then you have to pass it to a Lambda to parse the values and return the key values. Once this feature is enabled, you cannot turn it off. That's why I have the permanent marker there to indicate that it's permanent once that's turned on. So imagine you have this JSON payload, okay? The idea is that with the inline option, you choose your key, and then you use the expression to choose the appropriate JSON that you need. And so basically the partition is going to occur on those keys, okay? You can convert record formats. So if you have JSON data, you can tell it to turn it into Parquet or RC files. These are very specific files that are optimized for transforming data or working with data with specific open source projects with Apache, but a lot of large data applications read these two formats, okay? AWS Glue table is used to specify the schema of your source records for convert record format. So it's not as simple as turning it on. You have to also use an AWS Glue table. For compression, you can tell it to gzip it, snappy, zip, or use Hadoop compatible snappy. So there you go. Data Firehose is super useful and does a lot of stuff.